This time, STEM students, we're going to proceed with the part 2 of vector addition. So we're done with getting the sum, um, getting the difference, as well as using Pythagorean theorem. Now we're going to proceed with the component method of analytically adding vectors. When we say component method, also known as the vector resolution method, it means that we have to uh, consider the equations that we have discussed regarding the components of vectors. So we're going to go back with the cosine and then the sine, okay? So here are the conditions for using component method. The first one is it is used when two vectors added together do not form a right triangle, just like this one. Okay, we have vector A at a certain angle and then vector B at a certain angle, and then they do not form right triangle. So for example, in this condition, we have to add vector A, 7 kilometers, 55 degrees north of west, and then vector B, 10 kilometers, 38 degrees north of east. As you may notice, both of them are relative to the x-axis. One is relative to negative axis, yun yung north of west, and then the other one is relative to the positive x-axis, which is the north of east. So the first step here is to make a table for components and given vectors. So it's composed of 3 columns, one column for the given vector, one column for the x component, and then one column for the y component. And then at the very last row, you have to write r sub x and r sub y. What does this two mean? This means that this is the x component of the resultant, and then this one is the y component of the resultant. So your resultant also has components. Step number 2 is to solve for a sub x and b sub x using the cosine function. In other words, you have to solve for the x components of the vectors. So again, we have the equations familiar to you from the previous lesson. The x component comes with cosine, and then as you may notice, it also has theta with subscript A and then theta with subscript B. I just write the subscript here so that you may distinguish the angle for vector A and then the angle for vector B. The angle for vector A is 55 degrees while the angle for vector B is 38 degrees. So we substitute A is 7 kilometers, that's the magnitude of vector A, and then cosine 55 degrees, the result is 4.02 kilometers. And then for vector B naman, that's 10 kilometers, the magnitude of vector B, this one, and then cosine 38 degrees. The result is 7.88 kilometers. Now, you don't need to identify yet whether they are going to be positive or negative. Sa last, medyo last latter part pa siya ng solution gagawin. So number 3, after the x component, you have to solve for a sub y and b sub y, which are the y components of vectors a and b. Okay? So again, the y component is associated with the sign. That's why we have the sign there. And then we substitute the magnitude of vector A is 7 kilometers, and then sine 55 degrees. For B sub y naman, that's 10 kilometers times sine 38 degrees. The results are A sub y is 5.73 kilometers and B sub y is 6.16 kilometers. Again, let us leave them unsigned for now. After solving for those, we may now write the numbers that we obtained from steps 2 and 3 here in the table that we created for step number 1. We have 4.02, 5.73, 7.88, and 6.16. And here, dito sa ating table, that's where you will identify which quadrant the vector belongs. Vector A, since it is north of west, it means that it belongs to quadrant 2. And in quadrant 2, the x coordinate is negative, that's why we put the negative here. And the y coordinate is positive, that's why we put the plus sign here. On the other hand, the vector B is on the first quadrant because of the direction north of east. That's why both of our coordinates or components are positive. Okay? After that, we will add together the x components of individual vectors and the y components of the individual vectors, including the sign or considering the sign. So if we add this together, negative 4.02 plus positive 7.88, the answer is positive 3.86. And then here, positive 5.73 plus positive 6.16, the answer is positive 11.89 kilometers. So that's for step number 4. Ayan. So makikita mo, the north and then that's the basis. Next, ayan yung mga sign. Step number 5, use the Pythagorean theorem to get the magnitude of R. So just like in what we did with the Pythagorean theorem used as analytical method of adding vectors. But this time, instead of a squared and b squared, we will use the x component of the resultant or r sub x and then the y component of the resultant, which is the r sub y. Those are the values that we have obtained and written on the last row of the table from step number 4. Ito yan sila. Ito at saka ito. Okay? Then we substitute, we evaluate, and then the answer will be R, or the magnitude of the resultant vector, is 12.50 kilometers. So magtataka kayo, hala, bakit hindi na siya naka-bold face? Because we are just getting the magnitude. So okay lang kahit hindi siya naka-bold face. We consider it as scalar. Okay? Next, syempre dahil we have the magnitude already, the next step is to get the angle. And again, we're going to use the inverse tangent function to get the angle R. And again, the one that is above is the y component. And then the one that is below is the x component of the resultant. Yung resultant na yung basis mo for the angle. Okay? Substituting, the answer is 72.01 degrees. Remember, this is absolute value. So for example, the value of r sub y is negative nung nag-add tayo kanina, if ever naging negative siya, no? This one, you input this in the calculator as positive. You disregard the sign already because nga, we have the absolute value sign there. Okay? So we have the angle na. Okay? And then the last 2 steps, determine the direction by looking at the signs of r sub x and r sub y. Since both of them are positive, it means that they are in the first quadrant. The direction associated with the first quadrant is north of east. That's why our final answer will be, we put together the magnitude that we have obtained a while ago and then the, the angle followed by the specific direction. So again, remember this Cartesian plane, if the Rx, so depending yun sa Rx and then sa Ry, yung magiging direction mo. If Rx is positive and Ry or R sub y is also positive, it means that it is in the first quadrant and your direction must be north of east because this direction is north of east. And then, if your r sub x is negative, nung nag-add ka kanina, if ever, and then your r sub y is positive, it is located on quadrant 2, therefore, the direction must be north of west. Okay, ito yon, indicated by the yellow curve here. Next, if your r sub x is negative and your r sub y is also negative, that it means the resultant vector is located at the third quadrant and the direction associated with it would be south of west. And lastly, if your r sub x is positive and your r sub y is negative, the direction associated with that would be south of east because it is on the fourth quadrant. That is if the angle is not equal to 45 degrees. If it's equal to 45 degrees, automatic. If it's So, halimbawa, 45 degrees yung nakuha mo, no? 45 degrees yung nakuha mo. And then, your r sub x is positive and your r sub y is also positive. Let's say that's the case. Your direction would be northeast and not north of east. So, your final answer should be 12.15 kilometers northeast if the angle that you have computed is 45 degrees. So how about if the computed r sub x is negative and then the computed r sub y is positive and then the angle is 45. So we're talking about ano dito possibilities, no? Kung 45 degrees na siya. So the direction would be northwest. Nakuha nyo? Northwest na siya. So, paano kapag naman 45 degrees, tas nasa quadrant 3, parehong negative si r sub x at si r sub y. So, that's going to be southwest. And then, if r sub x and r sub y, if r sub x rather is positive and r sub y is negative, but the computed angle is 45 degrees, it means that it's located on the fourth quadrant and the direction associated with it would be southeast. Nakuha niyo yung differences, no? Hopefully, you got it, no? Ayan. So next, condition number 2 in using component method is that when you are already adding 3 or more vectors together. Okay? If you're adding 2 or more, 3 or more na, you don't need to draw actually. Okay? So let's have the given 6 kilometers north, 6 kilometers east, and 2 kilometers north. So here are we also, sorry. The first step again is to make a table. And this time, since we have 3 vectors, the rows just included another one. So nadagdagan lang siya. Kung 4 yan, let's say there is vector D, magdagdag ka lang rin ulit ng row, and so on and so forth. And then, the 3 columns remain. You have the column for the given vector, the column for the x component, and then the column for the y component. Next, ayan, as you have noticed, all of them are one-dimensional vectors. There are no vectors na northeast or north of east, walang angle, right? So, madali lang kunin yung component. Remember how to get the components for vectors that are one-dimensional. Since A is going towards the north, and north is associated with positive y, the a sub x becomes 0, and then the a sub y becomes positive 6 kilometers, since north is a positive direction. On the other hand, vector b is going towards the east, meaning it is located at the positive x direction. Since sa positive x lang siya, wala siyang y component, the b sub y becomes 0, while the b sub x is positive 6 kilometers because again, east is a direction that is positive. Okay? Then lastly, north ulit siya. Ang x niya ay magiging 0 again, just like vector A, and then the c sub y will just be the magnitude of the vector given with the sign that is positive since it is going towards the north. Okay? So we add them together. Ito 0 plus positive 6 plus 0, that's positive 6. And then positive 6 plus 0 plus positive 2, that's positive 8 kilometers. Ganun na siya kadali. Kapag um, one-dimensional yung vectors involved. How about if it's not one-dimensional? Let's say that we have angles. So before you write the components, just like in the condition number 1, you have to solve for a sub x and a sub y, b sub x and b sub y, c sub x and c sub y. Basically, before this step, you have to individually solve for the x and y components of each vector. Okay? Ayan. Next step, we use the Pythagorean theorem to get the magnitude. And then we input here the r sub x and the r sub y from our table. Manipulating it and using your calculator, you will get 10 kilometers. And the next step again, after getting the magnitude, you get the angle. And again, the numerator will be the r sub y, or the y component of vector r, or the resultant. And then the denominator is the x component of our resultant vector. So saan na naman yan galing? Galing yan ulit sa ating table. This one, 6 and then 8. Okay? Okay, moving on, using your calculator, you will be able to get 53.13 degrees. Now, how will you be able to get the direction? Ganun lang siya ulit. You're going to base the direction from the signs of your r sub x and r sub y. So just like our first example, in component method, the r sub x and the r sub y are both positive, meaning they are located on the first quadrant. So our angle, our direction rather, would be north of east. And since this angle is not equal to 45 degrees, you will not omit, you will keep it, and then the direction would be north of east. So again, kapag negative c r sub x and positive c r sub y, the direction should be north of west. If r sub x is negative and r sub y is also negative, the direction should be south of west. And then if the r sub x is positive and the r sub y is negative, the direction should be south of east. Thank you for listening to the part 2 of vector addition. See you again on our next video lecture, which will be all about kinematics quantities and motion graphs, or basically kinematics, motion along a straight line. Study hard, do your best,